Hey, it's Andrew Huang, and I am thrilled to be partnering with GRM Tools for the launch of Atelier, an incredible new piece of software for musical exploration and sound design. Atelier is both a standalone application and a plugin, so everything I'm going to show you, you can either use it in its own program or you can have it loaded up in as many instances as your computer can handle in a DAW. It's the spiritual successor to GRM Tools, which is a highly respected suite of plugins made by the GRM, the Pioneering Experimental Music Research Institute, founded by Pierre Schaeffer. I've had early access to this for several months. I was giving them some feedback, and I'm honored, honestly, that they asked if I would do a little tour video for them. So let's check it out. There are two rows of modules, so at the top it's processors and at the bottom it's modulators. You can add new modules by clicking a plus icon and choosing one, and it'll insert it right there in your left to right signal flow here for the audio processors. And for modulators, it's just one plus here because it doesn't matter what order modulators go in. Let's look all the way over to the left here at this Gen module. And as you can see, everything is nicely, dynamically resizable. It's a beautiful interface, honestly. So this module is generating the kind of droning pad chord sound that you're hearing in the background, and if I click anywhere here, I'm adding new tones to that chord at the frequencies that I've picked. These are called cursors, by the way, and I can double click to remove any of these. If you select any cursor, you can see its individual parameters, whereas below you're looking at module-wide parameters. You'll notice as I add cursors, they can be different colors. And this is one of the genius things about how Atelier handles channels and routing. It's all done with the spread parameter, which on this module is also controlled by the vertical position of cursors. So the more red or green a cursor is, the more that it will be going to an individual channel. For my setup right now, it's just green and red for stereo. But as a quick example, let's turn on some additional output channels. And you can see now I've got 4 possible colors, because with each new cursor I'm adding, Atelier is automatically routing them to all of my available outputs. So it's a super fast way to work with spatial audio, and there actually is no limit on how many different output channels you can have. It's just up to your CPU. One last cool thing about the cursors is that they always sum to white. So I've got a red cursor here going to one channel. As I move it up and its sound spreads to more channels, it turns more pink. And as I move it further up to white, it becomes evenly spread to all channels. So you have a visual indication of how spread or not each cursor's sound is. Couple other things that apply to most modules. If you click this icon, all of your cursors snap to the nearest semitone. And this slider at the top of any graph will shift the ratios of all your cursors. Modules also have snapshots, so I can go here and get pre-saved configurations of, in this case, the oscillators in my Gen module. And you can hear them gliding to their new values. That's controlled by this morph time, so I can set it to instant and immediately jump to a new snapshot. The morph time also affects my favorite feature of Atelier, which is the randomization. You can hit a die icon to randomize a module. Before I do that though, I'm gonna lock all the gain controls because I don't want gain to randomize. Very easy to just blast your ears when you randomize volume. But now let's hit the die. You can also hover over any individual parameter and press R to just instantly randomize it. Obviously though, the most fun is when you use the global random, where literally all things can be randomized at once. That's already a whole different thing. I'm also gonna turn up the morph time so we can have some fun hearing it reach those changes. And let's increase the randomization amount even further. All right, let's do a shorter morph time, and we'll go to 100% randomization. Oh yeah, we're in some alien insect territory. Just want to record this. That's another feature. Anytime you like something, you can just hit record, When you're done, hit it again, your recordings pop up here. And if you're using Atelier as a plugin, you can drag these audio files to your DAW. And if you're in the standalone, you can just drag them in and it'll load them into a new play module, which is their sampler. And it's also kind of granular, and we'll get to it later. All right, before we go, I gotta hit random one more time. There are only 3 modulator options. They've ingeniously crafted them to contain almost any type of modulation that you might want. Agitation is for random. So if I drag this to the pitch of our cursor, dial in the range, this goes as high as plus or minus 200%, by the way, and we get random modulation to the pitch. You can have it more steppy or more smoothed. Slant adjusts the ratio of time spent going up versus down, and at 0%, of course, they're equal. And this control for how cyclic it is basically turns it into a repeatable LFO, or, you know, you can get more amounts of randomness. And then jitter randomizes the amount of time between 2 steps. Before I look at the other modulators, now that we've seen how one works, let me just talk about how amazing modulation is in Atelier, because they've come up with some really clever ideas. So first of all, modulation is polyadic, and what that means is every single modulation routing can have a unique signal. So let me pull this one down here and we'll add another cursor. So now we've got left and right. Modulation is going to just one cursor. If I drag the exact same modulation to pitch on the second cursor, and let's rein that pitch in, you can see it's getting the same type of modulation, but the signal itself is actually different. If they were the same signal, then these pitches would be jumping around in exactly the same timing, which you can do, by the way. You can turn off the polyadic response. So now here, all modulations coming out of this agitation module will be identical, even though for each one, you can still scale them individually. So as an example of how powerful polyadic patching is, here I only have 7 modulation modules, I've used 30 wires, and I have over 150 unique modulation signals. Let's pull up a peak modulator. We will again route this to the pitch of our cursor, scale it back a bit, and now you can see I've got this one-shot modulation, which of course you can assign to a MIDI controller or whatever if you want, but I can also make it looping. I can give it a sustain stage, so whatever I'm triggering it with, it stays on that high value until I let go. But let's go back to looping for a sec and take a look at some extra controls. You can set the delay between each repeat of a modulation. So where time affects the timing of that modulation shape itself, delay can put space in between those. And then you also have this repeats control, so the time amount will stay constant, but it will fit more repeats into that same amount of time. And then here, this die icon is not for randomization, but it's for the chance that the modulation will fire. All right, now let's look at the last modulator, which is control, which is basically a fader, and you can map this to external hardware if you want, but with some interesting added ideas for a fader. You can smooth the response. So now there's a little bit of lag when I drag it around. Now, delay and loop are very odd. So delay sets a lag between when you move the slider and when it actually responds. And then loop sets how much of your movements will come back and be layered again on the output. So I'll just move it once, and then it'll kind of echo. More cool stuff about modulators, you can sum and scale as many as you want to the same destination. So let's drag an agitation up here. And I forgot to show you earlier, actually, you can scale all of the outgoing modulation with this slider. Let's add to that this peak modulation. So you can hear I've got my pitch slowly, randomly drifting up and down while I'm also laser beaming it. And you can combine as much modulation as you want this way, and of course you can hover over things to adjust the individual amounts. And I actually just realized I meant to drag these to the pitch, but I dragged them to the cursor. But that is great because I almost forgot I wanted to show you. Dragging something to a cursor means you're assigning the modulation to all of that cursor's parameters. I'll also mention there's a shortcut key W. Anytime you hold that down, it shows all of your wires. I'm assuming W is what that stands for. And of course, modulators themselves can be modulated. And this is also polyadic. So if you modulate a modulator, which is modulating a bunch of things, each of those outgoing modulations will be receiving a different modulation to itself. I've just said the word modulation so many times, but I hope you get what I mean. I did a lot of the earlier demonstrating using GRM Gen, which is basically your oscillator. And in a lot of ways, it's a very standard oscillator. You can mix your different waveforms, and each one has a timbre control. You also get this combination slider where you can either duck the oscillator with incoming audio, or you can have its volume follow the volume of the incoming audio. And next, let's look at this module, GRM Play, where you can load or record samples. Moving the cursor around fluidly adjusts its pitch and speed. Let's add another cursor, hit play on that. Now we've got our stereo spread happening. I feel like I can adjust a lot of this stuff and you can understand what's going on based on the very clear visualization. Zeroing in on a little window here. Moving that window around. Now obviously I've got these looping, but you can't also just one-shot them. We can do them both at once up here. I could play them individually, and we could throw a bunch of modulation at these and see what happens. Like, do you see how fun this is and how wild it is and how fluidly it all works? Next we have a comb filter, which is simple but powerful. Cursors have pitch on the x-axis and decay on the y. And then you have different ways to adjust the response of the partials. So you can make anything resonate, like even these simple clicky sounds can become chords. Or you can modulate it and even simple clicky sounds can become this. Let's look at GRM Band, basically an EQ. Check this out though. You adjust the width of a notch, or going this way, you can narrow it down to a band. And then I think you can just visually see what these controls are doing. And of course, when you have multiple cursors, then you're getting different processing through different channels. So like here, some interesting stereo effects happening when my bands have different settings or different modulation. Let's look at GRM pitch, and for this one, let's go to an individual pitch as our source sound. And now, each cursor will play back a pitch-shifted version of this signal. And while pitch is on the y-axis, on the x you get a delay, so the input audio has to reach each cursor for each of those pitch shifts to occur. And there's feedback, so the pitch shift keeps getting reapplied, and here I'm using the rotate parameter to route each channel's feedback to the next channel. Pretty cool idea. Can you imagine this with a multi-speaker setup and tons of cursors, each going to their own channel? Just wild. Adjusting the ratio is fun. Oh, and there are also freeze buttons for individual playheads. And while frozen, some parameters will still have some effect. GRM time is next, and this is basically a delay. Let's change up our input sound again. And I'll turn the delay mix up. So you can hear I've got this nice stereo delay. Let me show you the band passing, where Or of course, you can adjust the cutoff. And if you have multiple cursors, this can sound really nice. Speed adjusts kind of the virtual tape of the delay. So our tape can crawl all the way to a stop. Now we have what appears to be a very simple volume slider, gain. There's a cool thing that they've done here though, which is adding these muffle and distance controls, which mean that as you turn down a track, it becomes darker, or with distance, it seems to get further away. So it's this interesting kind of naturalistic approach to a fader, because it's not just volume dropping. It really can feel like something's getting quieter, which I know sounds like the exact same thing. But having this option to have things fade out in this more kind of real world sounding way is just a brilliant little touch. And then you additionally have a trim control. And so that one is just always volume up or down, not affected by muffle and distance. And then last, we have Viz, a beautiful scope. This one has elements that are resizable, so you can really just see what you want to see, whether it's spatialization or frequency. Got a lot of different options. You can turn on and off different channels. Actually, for funsies, let's turn back on my additional output channels. Look! Colors! So it really is one of those tools that just makes you think, why didn't this exist before? All of the modules totally fit in the lineage of experimental electronic music, but they've just been redesigned and rethought for how people actually interact with software and not like wanting to recreate a vintage synthesizer on your screen. And it's just so much fun. So congrats to GRM. Check their link in the description and I will see you in the next video. I totally forgot one little thing that I want to show. If you hold the command key and move anything, you get a little elastic band.